My stepmother thought she could steal my inheritance right out from under me. She believed I'd be powerless to stop her, but she never expected the lawyer I brought to the will reading. Before we dive into this story, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on so you never miss a tale of justice. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from today? Let me know in the comments. Okay, let's get into it. When my father passed away, I thought, the hardest part of my life had just begun. Grief has a way of hollowing you out, leaving you wandering through the days like a shadow of yourself. I spent weeks moving slowly through each moment, caught between numbness and sharp, aching pain. I believed I would need every ounce of strength to come to terms with the loss of the man who had raised me, protected me, and shaped the person I had become. But what I didn't realize was that another storm was waiting for me, one born not of grief, but of greed that my stepmother wasted no time making it clear that she believed everything my father had left behind belonged to her. She wasn't subtle about it either. Barely a week after the funeral, while I was still adjusting to the silence of my father's absence, she looked me in the eye and said, "You don't need to worry about the estate. Your father wanted me to handle everything. I'll take good care of it." At first, I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was overwhelmed, maybe she thought she was easing my burden. But her smile didn't feel warm, it felt triumphant, almost mocking. I noticed the way she was already moving through the house, rearranging furniture, locking cabinets that had always been open, and setting aside heirlooms with the casual confidence of someone who had already claimed victory. The will had not even been read yet, but she carried herself as though it had, as though she were the sole heir and I was nothing more than a guest intruding on her property. It was in that moment, standing in the living room surrounded by memories of my father, that I realized what my true challenge would be. Grieving my father would take time, but at least it was honest. My stepmother's greed, on the other hand, was a direct attempt to erase me, my place in my father's legacy, and the bond we had shared. And that was something I could not allow. Before I take you deeper into the chaos that followed, I think it's important to explain the people at the heart of this story: my father, my stepmother, and myself. Because without knowing who we were, you can't fully understand how betrayal cuts, or how justice restores what was broken. I grew up as my father's only child. My mother passed away when I was still very young, and for many years it was just the two of us. He was the kind of father who believed in quiet strength. He didn't have to say much to make a point. One steady look from him carried more weight than a dozen lectures. But he also had warmth. He always encouraged me to be independent, to learn, to trust my instincts. He worked hard, built a modest business from the ground up, and instilled in me the value of earning what you have done. By the time he remarried, I was in my late 20s. I had already carved out my own life, working steadily, paying my bills, building my own little corner of independence. When my father introduced me to the woman who would become my stepmother, I tried to be open. After all, he deserved companionship. He deserved happiness. But almost immediately, I noticed things that unsettled me. My stepmother was polished, always dressed to perfection, nails painted, hair never out of place. She had the kind of charm that works well at dinner parties, but wears thin behind closed doors. Beneath her smile, I sensed calculation. She spoke about my father's assets more often than his hobbies or dreams. She never asked me questions about my life, my work, or my plans. Her interest in me only extended as far as how I might fit into her social image. Still, I bit my tongue. My father was happy, or at least he seemed to be, and that mattered more to me than my personal feelings. So I kept things polite, respectful, but distant. Our relationship was never warm, but I thought it was stable enough. Looking back now, I see the warning signs more clearly. She would make little comments, offhand and almost playful, like, "When your father's gone, I suppose I'll have to figure out what to do with this big house all by myself." Or she'd laugh and say, "Don't worry, I'll keep the family business in good hands, better hands than yours, maybe." I told myself not to take it seriously, that she was just joking. But beneath those remarks was a sense of entitlement, like she was already rehearsing for a role she intended to play. And then there was my father. He was older now, more tired than I remembered him in my childhood, but still sharp, still thoughtful. Sometimes I caught him giving her a look when she spoke too freely about the estate or what she deserved. A look that was somewhere between irritation and resignation. He wasn't blind to her faults, but he didn't confront them openly either. I think he wanted peace in his final years, and so he let her indulge in her small pretenses. To me, life before his death felt like walking a delicate line. On the surface, we had a normal family rhythm. Dinners at the big oak table, occasional. Outings, polite holiday gatherings. But beneath that, there was tension, her subtle claims of control, and my quiet awareness that my father's love for me was the only thing keeping her from pushing me out completely. I suppose that's why. When he passed, the balance shattered so quickly. Without him there to mediate, she wasted no time trying to establish herself as the sole authority, and as much as it hurt, I wasn't entirely surprised, because deep down, I had known all along what she really wanted. The days immediately following my father's funeral were a blur of condolences, quiet meals, and empty silences. I kept expecting him to walk into the room, to hear his voice calling my name, to feel the steady reassurance of his presence. Grief makes the mind play cruel tricks, whispering that the person you've lost might still be just around the corner. But while I was lost in that fog of mourning, my stepmother seemed energized, almost invigorated. While I stumbled through the routines of daily life, she was moving quickly, decisively, as though my father's death had opened a door she had been waiting behind. One morning, just a week after the funeral, I arrived at the house to find her in the middle of what could only be described as a raid. Boxes were stacked high near the door. Drawers had been emptied. Items that had belonged to my father for decades, family photographs, his watch collection, the antique desk he had loved, were being labeled and packed as though they were little. More than merchandise, I stood frozen in the doorway, my voice catching in my throat. "What are you doing?" I finally asked. She didn't even look embarrassed. Instead, she gave me a practiced smile, the kind of expression that might fool a stranger, but rang hollow in that moment. "Don't worry, dear," she said, smoothly. "Your father wanted me to take care of these things. It's all mine now anyway, so I may as well decide what stays and what goes." Her words were a slap in the face. "It's all mine now anyway." She spoke as though my father's life, his possessions, his legacy, could be swept into boxes and hauled away without a second thought. I tried to protest, to remind her that the will hadn't even been read yet. But she cut me off with a wave of her hand, her tone suddenly sharp. "There's nothing in there for you. Your father told me everything was meant for me. Honestly, it would be better if you didn't even come to the reading. Save yourself the embarrassment." The room felt colder in that moment. My grief shifted into something else, something harder, sharper. My heart pounded in my chest, but instead of shouting, I stayed very still. I realized then that she wasn't just greedy. She was determined. She had already decided I didn't matter, that my connection to my father, my entire place in his life, could be erased with a single smug declaration. And that was the moment. I knew the line had been crossed. This wasn't about politeness anymore. It wasn't about tolerating her arrogance for the sake of peace. She wasn't simply playing house or making tasteless jokes about the estate. She was actively trying to cut me out of my father's legacy, to erase me from the story of his life. standing there, surrounded by the boxes of my father's belongings. I made a silent promise to myself I would not let her succeed. I didn't yet know how or when, but one thing was certain: she had underestimated me. After that confrontation, I hoped naively, perhaps that my stepmother would pull back, that she would realize how inappropriate and cruel her behavior was. But instead, she doubled down. It was almost as if she had been waiting for years, rehearsing for the moment my father would no longer be there to stop her. With him gone, she no longer needed to wear the mask of politeness. Her true self emerged, and it was ruthless. The first thing she did was try to isolate me. She started telling extended relatives and neighbors that my father had already taken care of me before his passing. According to her, I didn't need anything from the estate because I was independent. At first, I thought these were just careless comments, but soon I realized she was weaving a deliberate narrative, one where I was painted as greedy if I dared to contest her. Then came her meetings with the family lawyer. I learned through a cousin who overheard her bragging that she had been calling the lawyer repeatedly, pressing for clarifications about the will. She wanted early access to assets kept, asking what she could liquidate quickly, and even hinted that she might pursue changes. The arrogance of it made my skin crawl. You don't just change a will after someone dies. But in her mind, everything was negotiable if she wanted it badly enough. Meanwhile, at the house, she strutted about like a queen. Rooms that once held warmth and memory now felt like a showroom for her ambitions. She paraded around in my father's expensive watch, bragged to her friends about her new home, and spoke as though she had earned everything through her own hard work. One evening, when I came by to collect a few personal things of my father's, a stack of letters he had written me, tucked away in his desk, she blocked the doorway. With her arms crossed, she said flatly, "You need to stop clinging to the past. This is my house now. Don't make things harder than they need to be." Her words struck a nerve, but I bit down hard on my anger. Instead of arguing, I quietly turned away. Because as much as her smugness infuriated me, I began to understand something vital. Every move she made, every greedy claim, was painting her into a corner. The more brazen she became, the more witnesses there were to her entitlement. She thought she was solidifying her control, but in reality, she was exposing her true character to anyone who cared to look. Still, living under the weight of her manipulation was unbearable. Every interaction felt like walking into a battlefield I hadn't chosen, and deep inside I knew I was nearing the edge of what I could tolerate. There's only so much a person can take before something inside them hardens. For me, that moment came one rainy afternoon when I stopped by the house unannounced. I wasn't looking for trouble. I only wanted to sit for a while in my father's study, to breathe in the familiar scent of old books and polished wood, and feel closer to him for a little while. But when I walked through the front door, the sight that greeted me nearly knocked the breath out of my chest. Two men I had never seen before were carrying boxes down the staircase, boxes filled with my father's belongings. His record player, the leather-bound journals he had kept since his 20s, even a framed photograph of the two of us from my college graduation, all being hauled away like trash. And there she was, my stepmother, standing in the center of it all, clipboard in hand. She was directing them like a foreman at a construction site. "Be careful with that lamp, it's worth something. Put those books in the sell pile." Her voice was sharp, commanding, completely devoid of grief or respect. I froze in the doorway, anger rising so quickly I could barely control it. "What are you doing?" I demanded. She didn't even flinch. She looked up from her clipboard, smirked, and said, "I'm making space. I've already arranged buyers for most of this. It's just clutter, really. You wouldn't understand. You're too sentimental. Clutter." That was how she described my father's life, his treasures, the things that had defined his story. My hands trembled as I clenched them at my sides. For a moment, I was afraid of what I might do if I didn't walk away, but she wasn't finished. As I stood there, too stunned to speak, she added in a cold, clipped tone, "And don't think you're entitled to anything. Your father wanted me to have it all. You'll see for yourself at the reading if you bother to come. But really, it would be less humiliating for you if you didn't." Those words pierced me deeper than I expected. Humiliating. She wanted me gone, erased, forgotten. I walked out of that house in silence, rain soaking through my coat as I reached my car. I sat behind the wheel, hands gripping the steering wheel, so tightly my knuckles turned white. For years, I had tolerated her arrogance. I had told myself that my father's happiness was worth swallowing my unease. But he was gone now, and she had crossed the final line. That night, lying awake in bed, I replayed the scene over and over. Her smirk, her words, the sight of strangers carting away my father's legacy. A cold determination began to take root in me. I could no longer stand by and watch her strip away everything my father had built. She thought she held all the power, but she was wrong. I didn't know how yet, but I was done being the quiet bystander. It was time to fight back. The breaking point had left me shaken, but it also sparked something inside me clarity. For the first time since my father's passing, I wasn't just reacting to my stepmother's cruelty. I was thinking ahead. I was planning. A few days later, while sorting through some boxes in my own apartment, I came across a leather folder my father had given me years before. At the time, he had simply said, "Keep this safe. One day, you might need it." I had tucked it away, never opening it, never questioning what it held. That day, my hands trembled as I unlatched the clasp. Inside were neatly organized documents, copies of business contracts, financial statements, and tucked in the back, a sealed envelope with my name written on it in my father's unmistakable handwriting. My heart pounded as I slid it open. The letter inside was short but powerful. In it, my father explained that he had anticipated potential conflicts after his death. He reassured me of his love and then, in precise language, detailed the safeguards he had placed within his will. He had worked with his lawyer to ensure that certain assets, including the house, the family business, and heirlooms, were protected and could not be seized or misrepresented by anyone, not even his wife. Tears blurred my vision as I read those words. It was as though my father was still looking out for me, even from beyond the grave. He had seen the truth about her. He had known on some level that she might try to twist things in her favor, and he had made sure she couldn't. The next morning, I called his lawyer. My voice was steady, though inside I was trembling with both grief and determination. I told him about the letter, about the documents, and asked if he was aware of these protections. There was a long pause on the line before he answered, his voice low and deliberate. "Yes, your father was very clear with me about his intentions. That letter is proof of his wishes. Thank you for bringing it to me." I could almost hear the steel beneath his calm tone. Together, we began to piece together a plan. The will reading was already scheduled, and my stepmother was confident she would walk away triumphant. What she didn't know was that my father had built a trap of sorts, one that would snap shut the moment she overreached. The lawyer advised me not to confront her directly, not to reveal what I knew. "Let her feel secure," he said. "Her arrogance will be her undoing." And so I stayed quiet. I watched her strut around in her false confidence, watched her brag to relatives about her inheritance, watched her smirk when she thought I was shrinking away in defeat. All the while, I carried the letter in my bag, close to my heart, like a shield. I wasn't powerless. I had the one thing she never expected, my father's foresight. and a lawyer who was ready to stand with me. The day of the will reading arrived, and with it, a storm of emotions I could hardly contain. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing something simple and dignified. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I whispered silently to my father, "This is for you, for us." Walking into the lawyer's office, I felt my pulse quicken. The polished oak table gleamed under the soft lights, and the air smelled faintly of leather and paper. My stepmother was already there, seated at the head of the table as though she were the hostess of a grand event. She wore a tailored suit, her hair swept back, pearls at her neck, a picture of control and entitlement. When her eyes met mine, she smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the smile of someone who believed they had already won. "Glad you decided to come," she said smoothly. "I thought you might spare yourself the disappointment." I said nothing. Instead, I sat down across from her, folding my hands in my lap, studying my breathing. The lawyer entered moments later, carrying a thick folder. His expression was neutral, professional, but when his eyes met mine, there was the faintest flicker of reassurance. He began by thanking us for attending and offering condolences once more for my father's passing. My stepmother sighed impatiently, as though the formalities were unnecessary. Then he opened the folder and began to read at first. The words seemed to confirm her expectations. Certain personal effects, accounts, and investments were indeed allocated to her. She leaned back in her chair, chin lifted, radiating smug satisfaction. I could almost hear her unspoken thoughts. "See? I told you so, but then the lawyer paused. He reached into the folder and withdrew a sealed envelope, the very letter my father had left behind. He explained that my father had prepared an additional statement, one that clarified his wishes and placed binding conditions on the estate. The atmosphere shifted instantly. My stepmother's smile faltered, just slightly, as the lawyer broke the seal and began to read my father's words aloud. His voice was calm but firm, carrying the weight of authority. In the letter, my father spoke of his love for me, his pride in the person I had become, and his wish that I inherit not only his possessions, but the legacy of responsibility he had carried throughout his life. He specified in unmistakable terms that the house, the family business, and all heirlooms of sentimental value were to be mine. He had anticipated that disputes might arise, and he had made sure there was no room for interpretation. The documents were notarized, witnessed, and airtight. I watched as the color drained from my stepmother's face. She shifted in her seat, tried to interrupt, but the lawyer raised his hand calmly. "Please let me finish." The final lines of my father's letter sealed her fate. She was to receive a modest trust fund, enough to support her comfortably, but far less than she had imagined. The bulk of his estate, his true legacy, would remain with me. Silence filled the room when the lawyer finished. My stepmother's jaw tightened, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. She looked as though she had been slapped. I sat still, my heart pounding, but outwardly calm. Because in that moment, I knew the trap had closed. The silence that followed the lawyer's words was thick enough to choke on. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint ticking of the wall clock. My stepmother's face was a storm shock. Flickered first, then disbelief, and finally, a rage she could no longer disguise. "This is absurd." She snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She slapped her hand on the table, rattling the pens and papers. "There's no way he meant for it to be this way. He told me himself everything would be mine. He promised." The lawyer remained calm, his hands folded neatly before him. "I assure you, these documents are legally binding. They were prepared well in advance, signed, notarized, and witnessed. There is no ambiguity here." Her eyes darted to me, blazing with fury. You've manipulated this somehow, haven't you?" You put words in his mouth, tricked him. I sat still, meeting her gaze with steady calm. Inside, my pulse hammered, but I refused to let her see me flinch. I didn't put anything in his mouth, I said quietly. Those are his words. His wishes, and you can't erase them, no matter how badly you want to. Her mouth opened and closed, searching for an argument, but the liar cut in before she could lash out again. Mrs., he said firmly, I was your husband's attorney for over 20 years. I knew him well. These instructions were deliberate, considered, and ironclad. There is nothing you can do to alter them. The weight of those words hung in the air. She sat back in her chair, seething, her fists clenched in her lap. For all her arrogance, all her smug certainty, she was powerless in that moment. I could almost see the realization dawning in her eyes that all her scheming, all her posturing had led her here to a dead end. The victory she thought was hers had slipped through her fingers before she ever truly held it, and in that realization, her power dissolved. She muttered under her breath, shaking her head. This isn't fair. This isn't what I deserve. But the words sounded hollow now, stripped of authority. For once, she wasn't the one in control. I leaned back in my chair, breathing deeply, allowing myself the smallest flicker of satisfaction. My father had been right. Her greed had been her undoing. And finally, justice was beginning to settle into place. The lawyer slid the final document across the table toward me. His voice was calm, deliberate, but each word felt like the strike of a gavel. As executor of the estate, I hereby transfer full authority and inheritance to you, he said. Your father made his wishes abundantly clear. You are the rightful heir to everything he worked for. I picked up the papers with steady hands. The pen felt heavier than it should have, as though generations of my father's effort and love had been distilled into this single moment. Signing my name didn't just secure the estate, it sealed the truth. His legacy would stay exactly where he wanted it. With me dot across the table, my stepmother sat rigid, her face drained of color. She had no fight left in her. The realization had broken through completely. The wealth she thought was her future had never been hers to claim. You can't do this, she whispered, her voice cracking. But even she knew how empty it sounded. There was no one left to manipulate, no loophole to exploit. She had played her hand, and it had failed her. For a long moment, I simply looked at her. This was the woman who had treated me like an outsider in my own home, who tried to strip away everything my father had meant to leave me. And now, here, she was powerless, exposed, defeated. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Her downfall spoke louder than any words I could have thrown at her. Finally, I placed the signed papers back on the table and leaned back in my chair. This was never yours, I said softly, not his love, not his legacy, and certainly not his inheritance. The lawyer gathered the documents, nodding with quiet finality. That concludes today's proceedings. And just like that, it was done. The battle she thought she had won before it even began had ended in silence. And the victory was mine. For the first time since my father passed, I felt a deep, unshakable sense of peace. Justice hadn't just been served, it had been written in ink dot in the weeks that followed the will reading. The weight I had been carrying for so long finally began to lift. For the first time since my father's passing, I felt like I could breathe again. His home, his savings, his legacy, everything he had built with a lifetime of work was safe. More importantly, it was in the hands he wanted it in. Mind that my stepmother didn't take the loss gracefully. At first, she tried to bluster, making threats about taking this to court or exposing the truth. But without evidence, without any legal ground to stand on, her words collapsed on themselves. She learned quickly that the lawyer who had stood by my father all those years was more than prepared to defend his wishes. Eventually, the fight drained out of her. She retreated into silence, avoiding me in the few instances where our paths crossed. Her power had always come from intimidation and manipulation, but now, with the truth out in the open, she had nothing left to wield as for me. I began rebuilding. The estate wasn't just money or property, it was a reminder of the man my father had been: hardworking, thoughtful, and fiercely protective of me. Every decision I made moving forward was guided by that memory. I set aside part of the inheritance for causes he cared about, invested carefully, and ensured the home we had once shared stayed in the family. There were still moments of grief, of course. Losing a parent leaves a hollow that never fully closes. But knowing that I had honored his last wishes gave me a sense of closure I hadn't thought possible. He trusted me to protect what mattered, and I had done exactly that. And in the quiet of those evenings, when I walked through the garden he loved so much, I could almost feel his presence steady, reassuring, proud. In the end, my stepmother's greed had been her undoing. She had tried to take everything, but in doing so, she revealed exactly why my father had chosen to protect me so carefully. The lesson was clear, both for me and for anyone who heard this story. Greed doesn't just blind, it destroys. And sometimes justice doesn't roar with fanfare or fireworks. Sometimes it comes quietly, in a lawyer's steady voice, in the calm stroke of a pen, in the knowledge that the truth can't be stolen. I moved forward with peace, carrying both my father's love and his legacy with me, and my stepmother. She was left with nothing but the bitter taste of her own downfall.